Hello and welcome to Euromonitor's podcast series. My name is Lina Sidorenke and I'm here with François Razvadauskas, a consultant from our Vilnius office who specializes in urban development and mobility. Today we are going to be talking about how mobility patterns have changed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Hello, François.
Hello, Lina. Thanks for having me.
So to start with, why are we talking about this topic right now?
Well, the pandemic has really changed the landscape of mobility, and we have witnessed various changes over the past 18 months in what really has been an unprecedented period of time in modern history. But as more of the population is actually gaining immunity and people are returning to some level of normality, it is important to anticipate how that will further change mobility patterns going forward.
What's the background, or where are we coming from?
Well, at the beginning of 2020, before COVID-19 was actually declared a global pandemic, Euromonitor surveyed over 40,000 people in 38 countries about their daily commutes as part of the Voice of the Consumer Mobility Survey. And we again repeated this survey this year. And based on this information, we have a pretty good baseline with which to compare the behavior of consumers before and during the pandemic.
And what change are you seeing? Can you identify the most important differences in how people have altered to their commutes?
Yes, so firstly, we have witnessed fewer people using public transport in their daily commutes. So, for example, in the 2021 mobility, Euromonitor's Voice of the Consumer Mobility Survey, 38% of respondents pointed out at using public transport at least weekly for transportation. And that actually fell from 45% a year earlier when we did the survey prior to the pandemic being announced. We've seen public transport usage fall dramatically in some major cities, such as Milan, where usage actually dropped by 45% in 2020 when compared to pre-pandemic levels. And we've seen similar declines in other cities like Barcelona, Madrid, and Rome. And in 2021, usage is anticipated to rise, though it is still projected to remain below pre-pandemic levels. And secondly, we have also seen more people using personal cars for their daily commutes. In the 2021 Euromonitor's Voice of the Consumer Mobility Survey, 49% of respondents reported using a personal car to commute, and that was up from 45% a year earlier. But interestingly, this actually ties in with more people using some form of solo micromobility to commute, whether by bicycle, electric scooter, or an electric bicycle. For example, 47.1% of our respondents pointed out at using a bicycle for transportation purposes, at least weekly in 2021. And this compares to 43% in 2020. And this stems from social distancing rules, which have permitted people to avoid crowded transport modes in favor of individual transportation that obviously increases people's safety.
What factors do you think are leading to some people permanently reducing public transport use?
Well, I think we can mainly attribute this change to several issues, one being increasing health concerns and social distancing rules being placed. And this has ultimately led to more people turning towards individual transportation, as mentioned earlier. At the same time, we have seen municipal governments implementing infrastructure developments which favor cycling, for instance, or some sorts of micromobility, such as what we've seen in Paris, Bogota, and Berlin, who actually launched pop-up bicycle lanes. Also, remote work is playing a big role in this change, and this is one of the factors which have actually reduced commuting intensities. In the 2021 Euromonitor's Voice of the Consumer Mobility Survey, 74% of global respondents reported commuting at least once per week, and that was down from 77% in 2020. And if we think about the future of work, it is expected to take on a more hybrid look in the future, with more people dividing their time between remote and in-office work. And according to Euromonitor's COVID-19 Voice of the Industry survey that was done earlier in April 2021, 68% of industry professionals are actually going to try to expand remote work opportunities to reduce health risks to employees.
Obviously, the pandemic has inflicted financial difficulties for people, as lockdowns have reduced job security and triggered a raft of business closures. So has this changed consumer spending habits on transport?
Well, it does seem that people are expected to be somewhat more conservative in their transport spending habits in the near future if we compare this to pre-pandemic levels. In Euromonitor's 2021 Voice of the Consumer Mobility Survey, 20.6% of respondents actually pointed out that they will decrease transport spending in the next 12 months compared to just, say, 16.3% in 2020. And this can be explained by the drop in incomes witnessed across some major economies. For example, disposable incomes per capita in 2020 dropped by 9% in Russia, 7% in Brazil, and 4% in the US compared to a year earlier in real terms. And despite incomes expected to grow in 2021, some economies may still be left reeling from the after effects, and this will obviously constrain consumer spending, especially on big item buys. In addition, the drop in transport spending could also stem from the rise of remote work, which is, again, reducing demand for transportation services. And according to the analytics and advisory firm Gallup, 7 in 10 US white-collar workers were actually still working remotely as of April 2021.
Are there any outliers, any exceptions to the rule?
Well, if we're talking about a reduction in the use of public transport due to remote work, that doesn't apply as broadly to, say, essential workers who must work in person, or if we're talking about emerging and developing economies where remote work opportunities are somewhat less accessible.
How do you think mobility patterns will change in a post-pandemic world?
Yeah, this is a tough question because no one really knows how long the pandemic will last for, whether it's another 6 months, a year, 2 years. Indeed, the longer it lasts, the more consumers will change, and the more likely it is going to usher some sort of a transformation of consumer mobility. One thing that we can rather confidently say is that mobility is likely to be less car-based and instead favoring micro-mobility, shared mobility, and public transport. We are already seeing the growth of not just shared mobility apps, but also mobility as a service, which is touted to revolutionize urban mobility by integrating all modes of travel, such as shared mobility, car rentals, and public transport into one system. And this way, it is expected to make personal cars practically obsolete. In fact, WIM, which is one of the key players in the industry, suggests that mobility as a service will actually signal the end of car ownership. Now, another point to note is the focus on sustainability. This is going to drive the transition to non-internal combustion engine vehicles as more governments place bans on diesel and petrol power. And simultaneously, we expect consumers to continue embracing micromobility and other alternative transport modes. In the future, we anticipate that micromobility is expected to account for a much larger share of consumer mobility.
Do you believe these changes are transitory or will they be permanent?
Overall, I think with public transport, this is more likely to be a short to medium term effect, though we can say that some permanent changes can be expected. As countries across the world, they deal with the effects of the pandemic, and as herd immunity hopefully sets in, we should expect to see most consumer preferences for urban mobility return to some level of normality. For example, according to our Euromonitor's COVID-19 Voice of the Industry survey that was carried out in April 2021, 3/4 of respondents believe that a reduction in public transit is expected to be either a short or a medium-term effect. But at the same time, in the same survey, 13% of respondents actually pointed out they will permanently reduce public transport usage. With micromobility, we are likely to see a greater permanent change. In Euromonitor's April 2021 COVID-19 Voice of the Industry survey, a third of respondents pointed out that they will permanently increase the use of non-enclosed transport, such as the use of bicycles or scooters. And we have seen over the last 5 years a boom in micromobility, with e-scooters and bicycle sharing schemes popping up across many cities in the world. And it does tie in with the growth of new urbanism, which is an urban framework that encourages the use of non-passenger car-based mobility, such as cycling and walking. And it sees micromobility as one of the solutions to mitigating very pervasive urban issues, such as excessive air pollution and obviously traffic gridlocks. So to put it in a nutshell, the future of mobility is bound for a major makeover. In less than a decade, I'd say our daily commute may look far more different to what it currently is.
Who should be taking this information into consideration, and how could they use it to win?
I think this can be important for various private and public organizations, businesses, government institutions, for example. The future of mobility is a key topic for municipal governments who are actively seeking to develop more sustainable consumer habits. In a world that we have to remember is getting more urbanized than ever, and more solutions are needed in order to account for the ever-growing number of people living in cities.
Thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your insights.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you so much for listening at home. I hope you've learned something about the latest mobility trends. To learn more about this topic and other global consumer trends, check out our full multimedia collection, including podcasts, videos, and articles at euromonitor.com/insights.